A brain conflicted, in which is said that consciousness can split if different regions of the brain refuse to talk to each other. Around my heart 3 men have come, seating outside, not in where love abides, the love that soul is lord upon my life. The woman saying these words advanced with her hands outstretched. A man named Pisa was holding her arm and directing her gently. Another blind lady, thought Galileo. The way she dressed, she might have been a nun. What is the matter this time? He asked, turning to Frick. This lady is quite intriguing, answered Frick. Unlike the 2 blind painters, the man without the eyes and the old dame without the visual cortex, this lady has nothing missing. Indeed, she can actually see, except she sees unconsciously. Watch, said Frick, pointing a long stick toward the advancing woman. But at the last moment she veered to the right. Again Frick pointed the stick at her, and again at the last moment she turned and walked away. Why did you turn just now? He asked the woman. I thought I heard a noise, was the reply. You just witnessed it, exclaimed Frick. She sees, but she denies it. I am convinced this is what happened to her brain. For some reason, the coalition of neurons that give rise to consciousness decided to retreat from the visual parts of her brain. Nonetheless, some visual modules there are still at work, but they do so unconsciously, like zombies. What is a zombie? Asked Galileo. A mechanism in the brain that does its job unconsciously, like an automaton, answered Frick. In Teresa's case, a small dedicated machine inside her brain that can detect an obstacle and steer away from it, but does so independently of Teresa, who is unaware of it. Well put, intervened Piso. Teresa's symptoms come from the brain. I have said it for years, but my colleagues still think it all comes from the womb, and force her to wear medicated pessaries and fumigate her insides. Then Piso whispered to Frick and Galileo, She is no ordinary lady. Teresa can read her Latin, write her poetry, and through her wit and logic she put to shame well-seasoned scholars. But that was also how her misfortunes started. She fell in love with a philosopher, a young ambitious squire who used his intellect like a knife, with which he carved to pieces his opponents, and soon enough they paid him back by carving out a piece of him. To teach a lesson to the lovers, they plucked him right in front of her. That day Teresa became ill. For 7 months she could not see, and even now she often faints. At times she cannot stand, and other times she becomes blind. What happened after that? Asked Galileo. The usual, answered Piso. She went to a nunnery. Teresa, will you tell us what happened to your squire? Teresa lowered her eyes. We once were wed in secret, but he would not be parted from his worldly spouse, not even for a day. Philosophy, he said, cannot bear rivals. To me the name of wife was nothing. It's sweeter to be a mistress, love and be loved, so that our faith and love must be professed anew and with fresh will every single day, not forced on 2 tied prisoners by the chains of marriage. So when they parted us, I made my will his own, and to be faithful to his love, I married the only one whose vows increase one's virtue. Yes, I long to know where he may be, and yet I fear that since I took my vows, his love has wilted, for he has never called for me. I fear I would forgive, and to forgive redeems the soul, but love is doomed. "Do you remember how you and he were parted?" asked Piso.
"One night I fell asleep with him. I heard a scream, and then it was all dark. When I woke up, I felt as if my heart were taken from my bosom, and now it's beating elsewhere, and I am split in two."
"She may know better than she thinks," said Piso in a low voice. "I am not sure the part of her that sees is truly unconscious. All while she insists she is blind, her left hand can do things no blind person could do. Let me show you," he said, and holding Teresa by the hand, he helped her to sit, while he picked up a deck of cards. "Tell me, Teresa," he said, "do you see these cards?" And he spread them out on the table.
"How can I see them if I am blind?" she answered.
"Which card is this?" asked Piso, picking a 4 of clubs.
"How would I know?"
replied Teresa. "Which of these cards do you like best?" asked Piso, spreading the deck so that the Jack of Spades stood out right in the middle. Teresa blushed visibly.
"Doctor, you are teasing me. You are playing some tricks."
And while saying so, Teresa's left hand reached for the Jack of Spades and deftly turned it face down on the table. "Isn't it remarkable," said Piso, looking at Frick and Galileo. "A part of her brain, the one controlling the left hand, can see the cards perfectly well, and seems to be much smarter than a zombie." "How do we know that she is not feigning her blindness?" quipped Galileo. "Why would she feign it?" said Piso, unperturbed. "A few times I took my time to observe Teresa when she thought she was unseen, and still she acted blind. Besides, sometimes she is not just blind, but in a trance. Then one can squeeze her hard above the clavicle or prick her with a sharp nail, and she does not complain." "Quite interesting," said Frick, looking at Galileo. "Teresa has hysterical blindness, or so they used to call it, thinking it was due to vapors from the womb. But what we saw just now makes me agree with Piso. If the part of her that sees can understand which card is which, blush at the Jack of Spades, and act appropriately in many situations, it's hard to argue that it is unconscious. And so there may be a second minor consciousness inside her brain, one split from Teresa's dominant major consciousness, the one that talks to us." Galileo thought of Ishmael. His consciousness would split in two, into Ishma and El, when Salerno split his brain by freezing the nerve fibers connecting the two sides. Did Teresa's consciousness also split in two, between one part that spoke and one that saw? And the Teresa that saw but could not speak, was she like El, a clandestine passenger hiding inside the skull, coming to the fore only if unseen? "That's just what I think," said Piso. "When Teresa has one of her spells, it is as if a blind woman and a mute woman were housed in the same skull, not knowing they live together. Perhaps a transient gap has risen inside her brain and separates the part that speaks from the one that sees." "Indeed," approved Frick. "Perhaps her brain is occupied by two coalitions, struggling for control. They fight over the cortical territories, advance and retreat, split and merge. Right now they are split. The one that hears has taken control of the brain's northern territories. She speaks to us and decides what to do next. The one that sees has been excluded from those dominions and reigns over the south, the visual regions. There she sees and understands but cannot speak, and only occasionally she manages a sortie, a swift incursion done with the left hand." "Just so," commented Piso, "and bear in mind that the splitting and merging of her mind can happen in an instant. Let me try something now. I just received a package that should please her." He winked at Frick and Galileo,
and then addressed Teresa. "Teresa, you have received a present. Can you see it?" said Piso, placing a small wooden box on the table. Teresa shook her head. "It comes from somebody who greatly admires you and wishes to regain your confidence." Teresa shook her head again. Piso opened the wooden box, full of tiny gears and bells. He turned a crank, and right away the box began to sing, chirping like a bird. "Lo and behold," said Piso to frickin' Galileo, "a music box! And what a song! On summer nights in Paris, young men would sing it to their beloved. And best of all, the author of both text and melody is—" But Piso stopped, looking at Teresa. Her arms outstretched, she had fallen to her knees and closed her eyes. Then, almost imperceptibly, Teresa began to sing along, swaying her head softly. Then, when the song was over, she raised herself and quietly cried. "My song," she murmured. "My song, his song, the song that says he thinks of me all the time, the song that breaks his silence and stirs my joy." Slowly, Teresa opened her eyes, looking toward the sky, and then she cried again. "My Lord, I am one again, and see the soul's fountain in a bed of crystal, the divine sun, its brightness dazzling, the golden spear ending in a point of fire." Piso gently took Teresa's hand. "I knew hearing his words might heal you, though they may just be a melody in a box. You see, gentlemen," he said, addressing frickin' Galileo, "it is as if, now that Teresa heard her beloved song, the visual parts of her brain were reconciled with the speaking parts, as if a partition were removed that kept wine and water separate, and the two were allowed to mix again and become one." Or maybe, thought Galileo, it was as if one were conversing with a friend in a gusty wind. When the wind is blowing, your words do not reach your friend, nor his you. Then suddenly, between one gust and the other, the conversation can proceed. Maybe the parts of her brain were separated by some nervous wind, which blew when she was distressed. And maybe such a wind did not just blow inside Teresa's mind. Maybe inside his own head too, clandestine portion of his brain were hiding and plotting their furtive subterfuges, laboring day and night to pursue their hidden schemes, doing things he would not want to do, perhaps turning him sad or gay, friendly or ill-disposed, and would not tell him why, nor could he speak to them and let them hear the voice of reason. How many twins were there who shared his brain? How many selves were housed within one's mind? Notes. In 1618, the French physician Piso, Charles Lepoin, trusting, as he said, to experience and reason, overthrew the doctrine of hysteria that had ruled for 2,000 years, showed that it occurred at all ages and in both sexes, and that its seat was not in the womb but in the brain. It is possible, though by no means proven, that certain symptoms of hysteria, now called conversion disorder, may be due to the functional reversible disconnection among brain regions and to the blockade of some crucial pathways. Teresa's mind surely is split, in no small measure because she is herself a medley of multiple personalities. In part she is modelled after Héloïse, the lover and secret wife of Peter Abelard, who, after suffering the notorious assault, perhaps instigated by rival factions, forced her to become a nun. He was not only a philosopher, but a composer of poems and songs. The early ones love songs addressed to her, the later ones, when he somehow lost interest and had become a monk, turned to sacred topics. One of the few melodies of Abelard that passed down to posterity comes from a hymnal and bears the strange title O Quanta Qualia.
Another source is clearly Saint Teresa of Avila, who is paraphrased when sight is regained. As far as one can tell, neither Eloise nor Saint Teresa was affected by hysteria, although Teresa's ecstasy and other peculiar religious phenomena have been considered at times as bordering on the pathological. Hysterical phenomena such as paralysis, blindness, fainting, and aphasia can also occur in acute instances of romantic love, though this part of the literature is curiously neglected and deserves further study. Finally, and most to the point, Teresa is modeled after several patients described by Pierre Janet, who in his medical thesis L'état mental de hystérique, 1892, introduced the concept of dissociation between physic functions, emphasized the link between symptoms and early trauma, and gave many examples of the role of the subconscious. In this regard, the question Crick and Pisa briefly entertain is a difficult one. Are unconscious perceptions and actions truly unconscious, carried out by functionally isolated modules, also called the zombie systems? Crick and Koch, A Framework for Consciousness, Nature Neuroscience 2003. Or are they conscious on their own, like the non-dominant hemisphere in split brain patients, just hidden away from the dominant consciousness? And how would one know? At the end of the chapter, Galileo ponders how much he is really in control of his own brain and actions. Is there a hidden Galileo inside his skull, a shy clandestine one, who may see and do things the dominant one may prefer to ignore, hold unsavory prejudices, and cause slips of the tongue? But who is really in charge, and what does this clandestine think, being carried along without much say? The initial reference is to Dante, Rime 47.